Good morning everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. I had a bunch of mandarins and a bunch of eggs to use today. So because I use a Thermomix, and people have been asking me more about them, and I'd really love to sell a couple more this month to make up my 6 for the 60 days to help with paying off mine. So if anyone's interested, let me know. But I've had a couple of questions about different ways that I use it. So I had all these mandarins and I had all these eggs. So I looked up Cookie Do, which is the onboard recipe platform. They have a website as well, and you can put ingredients in. So I put eggs in and mandarin, and then had a fiddle with what recipes came up and were suggested and all that sort of stuff. And I decided to make some mandarin curd and a mandarin cake and a mandarin jam. I've never made jam in the Thermomix before, so that was a new one for me, and it worked really well. Nice and easy to clean up as well, and it stirred for me instead of me having to stir, so that was great. So come along and see what I got done today using all those mandarins and all the eggs, and I will see you again next time. Thanks guys. So first up we had to juice all the mandarins. Sonnet helped me a lot with these. I've got a Kmart juicer which works quite well, but we're concerned about burning out the motor, and Tracy sent me this attachment for my KitchenAid, which is superb. It's because it's run by the KitchenAid, it's not going to burn out the same way, sort of thing. Sonnet had a little bit of trouble with the leverage on it though. Because it's too high, she couldn't get the pressure, so she could juice the first half, but I had to juice the second half for her to get the excess out. So she preferred the Kmart one because it's a downward pressure and she doesn't have a whole lot of weight or strength to put behind it. But this one will definitely be much longer lasting, and thank you very much, Tracy, for that, because it will last far past the Kmart one. And it works really well, and you can speed it up or slow it down to get the time quicker to get it all done. Mandarins aren't the easiest things to juice anyway, because they tend to split as you're putting them on the little, I can't remember what it's called, the reamer thing, so they tend to break into pieces, and then it makes it a little uneven and a little less easy to control. But we got all the mandarins that we had left and needed to use juiced. Next thing I did was I pulled up the Cookie Do recipe for lemon curd. So I put a little inset here with the screen of the Thermomix so people can see what I'm looking up here. I've had some questions about how it works and things like that, so this gives you an idea. So I looked up lemon curd, and there is a few different lemon curds, and there is one that's a big batch, a 1300 gram one. So that's the one that I wanted to make, because obviously I'm trying to use up eggs and the mandarin juice. So I put that recipe in. You can scroll down and check the recipe before you get started, so it gives you an idea of what you want out on the bench or what you might need to go and find and things like that. And then once you've done that, you start cooking. So I started following the recipe, so it's step by step. You just follow it and hit the next button. I reduced the sugar on this because it's mandarin, not lemon, and mandarin's a lot sweeter than lemon. It possibly could have gone down even just a touch more, but I put 380 grams instead of 480 grams, and then poured the mandarin juice in, which was 300 grams, into the container as well. We used coconut oil instead of butter, obviously, because that's what we tend to do. Now this curd is quite a runny curd, so the ratio seemed a little bit off, but I was following the recipe because I wanted to try it. I'm glad I did. So I used coconut oil instead of butter and put the relevant amounts of that in, and then 6 eggs. And of course, farm cracked eggs, you want to crack each one into a bowl before pouring it into the rest of your ingredients, because you never know when you might get an egg that isn't usable, and then you've wasted all the rest of the ingredients because you've cracked a bad egg into your container. So we always crack our eggs one at a time into a bowl before placing them into the rest of the ingredients, just to make sure that the eggs are all good. They should be at this time of year because we're going through them fast enough and they're freshly laid, but it's always a good habit to get into. Then you let it cook. So this recipe uses the thickening mode, which is an awesome mode. You can use it for your custards or your bechamel sauces, hollandaises, all those sorts of things. And it has sensors in the blade and the base of the bowl, and it senses the viscosity of what you're cooking, and it judges how long it's going to take based on the viscosity and the temperature that it gets to and things like that. So it states that it'd take approximately 10 minutes, but it'll take however long it takes to get it to the right viscosity and the right temperature to make it into lemon curd. Oh, well, Mandarin curd in this particular case. So it does that for however long it needs to go, and then when it's finished, it chimes at you and tells you that it's done. I poured this into a large canning jar. This is a 36 Fowler's Vicola jar. It's about 1.2 litre, and I poured it into this to stick it in the fridge to chill, and left it in the fridge until I was ready for it later. The next thing I was going to do is use some of the mandarin juice to make a mandarin jam. So I use Pomonas Pectin recipes a lot. They're on their website. They use a low sugar pectin that uses a calcium water to help create the texture, and it requires 4 cups of pulpy juice. So I kept some of the fruit from that was left in the shells when we had juiced them, and added more juice to it as well. It takes 1/4 cup of lemon juice and 2 teaspoons of calcium water. Now, I've never made jam in a Thermomix before because I had the TM31, which wouldn't get hot enough, but the new Thermomix gets hot enough to boil. So this is all a bit of a test run, but I wanted to give it a go. So I put all the liquid in there and bring it to a boil. So you want it to be a rolling boil. I've said this before, that a rolling boil means that if you're stirring it, it's still boiling. So I turned the stir on fairly low, on sort of a speed 1, and then I set it to 105 degrees. It took around about 10 minutes to get to the 105 degrees, and you could and it was at a rolling boil. It was bubbling and bubbling while it was stirring. While it was going, I mix the pectin with the sweetener. So Pomonas Pectin, most pectins, you mix them in with your sweetener so that it spreads through the jam better. So the minimum sugar for this is 3/4 cup to 2 cups. I did 3/4 to start with and didn't find it sweet enough, so I did 1.5 cups. And a lot of that was probably my own fault because I wasn't real pedantic about pulling all the white pith off the mandarins because I was lazy. So there was a touch of bitterness in there. So I did 1.5 cups of sugar with the 3 teaspoons of the Pomonas Pectin and mixed that through. Once it came up to the boil, and I've got some footage from my phone here, but it's hard to see because it got really steamy, as it does. So it's at a rolling boil, it's bubbling and boiling whilst it's still stirring. Then I poured the sugar in while it was still stirring and heating. I turned the speed up a little bit to about a 3 because I wanted to make sure that pectin and sugar was distributed well. It didn't settle in the bottom or anything like that. And then you want to bring it back up to that boiling point of 105 degrees. Now, there's some jam recipes on Cookie Doo that are using just sugar and fruit, and if you were doing that, you have to cook it for 20-30 minutes. But with pectin, that's unnecessary, which is partly why I use the pectin. Also to reduce the sugar, because those jams are generally half sugar, half fruit. So I bring it back up to the 105 degrees, and once it's up at the 105 degrees while stirring, then I held it for 2 minutes so that the pectin had the ability to distribute well, to dissolve, and all that sort of thing. So then it was done. So the jam it doesn't set while hot, it sets once it cools. That's pectin for you. But as you scrape it out of the bowl, you can see it's starting to set on the sides of the bowl because it's cooling down on those edges there. So I put it into jars, just use 1/2 pint jars for this jam, and whatever I could find, I had a mix of jars. I'm not sure how the kids will like it because of that little tiny bit of bitter undertaste, but I will really enjoy it. It might be nice on some biscuits or something. And then I used white vinegar like I normally do and cleaned all the rims of the jars, taking extra care because it's a jam, so it's going to be quite sticky around the edges of the jars. You want to make sure there's no jam in there that's going to affect the sealing of the jar. And then put the lids on. So I used a couple of lug lid jars here, and I had some foot jars, canning lids as well for the other jars. So I used mix of both, as I do most of the time, and then put them, got all the lids on, finger tight for jars lids and firmly tight for the lug lid jars, and then they were all ready to go. I used the steam canner for these because it's a small batch, so less water usage, all that sort of thing. The steam canner works really well. So I put water in the steam canner, brought it up to warm because you've got warm jars, so you want the temperature in the canner to start out warm, and then put the lid on and let it go. So I go to zone 3 and I can these for 15 minutes. Then, while that was all going, the next thing I was going to do was use that Mandarin curd to make one of the Edna's lemon curd tea cakes. Now, I think I've made that before on here, and I really, really enjoy it. And I thought, wonder if I can make it with the Mandarin curd. It's definitely not going to be as pungent or as tangy or anything like that, but it might be really nice. So I double the cake. I use 300 grams of plain flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 120 grams of ghee, or you can use coconut oil or butter or whatever. I've got ghee at the moment, so I'm using it, but later in the month sometimes I use coconut oil. And then I use 200 grams of sugar, which is a bit less than the recipe calls for, and you could probably reduce that as well if you wanted to. Mix it all in the Thermomix. I just threw it all in after making the jam. And then it's like speed 5 for 30 seconds, and it turns into sort of a shortbready dough crumble type thing. I lined a square baking tray. This is a 20 by 20, I think, or a 9 by 9, and maybe 8 by 8. Really not sure. It's a square. It's a pretty standard square baking tin, like ceramic for us. I lined it with some baking paper, and then you put half of the cake mix into the pan, and you sort of press it down so that it's a bit like a slice. Press it down in the bottom of the pan, and then you pour the curd over it. Now, the curd was thinner than the lemon curds that I've made before, because I've just made my standard lemon curd mix, and I was a little concerned, but I went with it. So I poured the curd over it, and then I crumbled the rest of the mixture over the top. So neatly just crumble it into chunks over the top, a bit like you would any sort of a crumble. And then it goes in the oven, and I think it was, I think it's 40 minutes maybe. I don't know. I'll try and remember to put the link in the description, and if I don't and you want it, just prompt me in the comments and I will put it there for you. And then, so we cooked it in the barbecue like normal, stuck it in the barbecue. Then the jars were ready to come out. So once your steam canner has finished your time, you just let it sit for 5 minutes like normal, take the lid off, pull the jars out, and the jars sit for 24 hours as normal before you take the rings off and put them on your shelf. Wash them down if you need to. Steam canner's less likely to need to wash anything down. So once they were out, they sit on that board on my bench until tomorrow. And then the cake was ready as well. So this is the cake that is once it's sliced. Now, with the curd being thinner, the cake has turned out more like a tea cake. So normally I make quite a thick lemon curd. It's a spoonable lemon curd because I use it for a variety of things. And I put it on this cake, and the cake ends up being a bit like a shortbread slice. Like the cake itself is a bit like a shortbread, and the topping is like a crumble, and it's a slice rather than a cake. Obviously, the thinner curd means that the cake is absorbing some of the liquids from that curd, and the curd isn't a defined layer in the middle anymore, and the cake is really cakey. So I will definitely be trying this with my lemon curd and dropping the thickness of the curd, adding a bit more lemon juice. So that's what I did today, using the Thermomix and the Mandarins and trying to use up some eggs and just getting a few things churned out in the one day. I hope you enjoyed joining me today, and I will talk to you again next time. Bye, guys.